Why? Why can I experience God's peace when everything else around me is crumbling or failing or not going the right way? Why? Because I know that at the end of all things, Jesus has accomplished for me an eternal victory that far outweighs all of the momentary struggles that I might go through. For our community. Want to look online and look into the camera and just welcome everybody that's watching. Come on, make some noise. Welcome our Fulton campus. So excited that you guys are with us. So thankful for our Fulton campus. Looking forward to being down there soon. And just so thankful for all the life that's happening down there. And the 7, I believe, baptisms last week. Come on, make some noise for the baptisms last week. Over 60 baptisms across all of our campuses. And just very thankful for that. And we already have 6 signed up for the next baptism. People that just saw what was happening. I've had questions from students about how to get baptized. That has just been so exciting. One other thing that I want to celebrate before we kick into the message this morning is, yes, Pastor James will be back next week. So praise God for that. Excited. I texted him this morning. He is on a plane back from Istanbul this morning, so he's probably somewhere over the Atlantic right now, and he'll be back with us next week for the next part of this series in Welcome Home. But on Easter, if you came for Easter, you filled out a survey card, and we asked you, hey, what do you want to hear more about? What do you want to learn more about? And by and large, one of the greatest responses was finances. 80% of you checked that you wanted to learn more of what the Bible had to say about finances. Now, this is a celebration because already we had on the calendar for May 5th this financial learning experience. We have a special guest speaker coming in that morning to talk about stewardship and financial vision for the church. And then that afternoon from 3 to 5, we've got a financial learning experience. And to make finances fun and exciting, there is a gift to that. This guy is gifted. His name's Joe Stengel. He has a gift for making finances and financial conversations sound fun and exciting. And here's the demographic. Pastor Matt was talking to him last week that if there was one demographic that he is hoping will be in this seminar, it's young adults and students. So if you have a high schooler, I'm telling you, and if you're in this room and you're 20 or older, you started making some financial decisions in your 20s that you're still paying for. Come on. Some of them are called college. Get that 4-year degree. It's pretty expensive. And so you're making financial decisions in your 20s, but so often you don't have the kind of financial coaching that's going to be offered. Listen to me now. 1 out of 4 Americans actually live debt-free. 75% of Americans live with debt. God did not create us to live under the burden of debt. This seminar is going to be a way to get out of debt, to live financially free, so you can be a blessing. God has blessed us to be a blessing to other people. That's what we want for our church. So sign up for that. You can hop online, get some more information about that there. Sound good? All right. Everybody say, take your shoes off. Turn to your neighbor, say, take your shoes off. Don't really take your shoes off, please. Our facility staff is really good, but I don't think there's any amount of deodorizer that could clear out the funk in this room that will happen if we all took our shoes off. Today, I want to share a message titled, Take Your Shoes Off. And really, this is talking about the story of the prodigal son. And if you've been following along, the prodigal son is a story that Jesus uses to illustrate a kingdom principle. He often uses parables, is what the Bible calls them. They're stories that help illustrate kingdom principles. And so Jesus uses this parable of what's called the prodigal son to illustrate a kingdom principle. The story of the prodigal son goes like this. There's an older brother and a younger brother. The younger brother goes to his father and says, Dad, I hate your guts. Why don't you give me the inheritance now so I can go off and do my own thing? No joke. For whatever reason, the father gives the younger son his inheritance. The younger son goes off, and as the Bible says, he squanders his wealth in wild living, prostitution, gambling, crazy, horrible use of finances. And he ends up eating pig slop. He ends up getting hired as a servant at a pig farm, feeding the pigs. He's looking at the pig slop, and he's going, man, my father's servants are living better than I'm living right now. I should go back home, apologize to my dad, and see if he'll hire me as a servant. But the son, as he's coming home, he's rehearsing his apology speech to his father, and his father sees him from a distance, and his father runs toward him, and he throws a robe on him. I'm going to pick up in Luke chapter 15, verse 22. The father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. And we learned a couple weeks ago that the robe represents the robe of righteousness that God wants to give us. His honor that he wants to cover our shame with. Each and every one of us, we've gotten dirty and messed up by the crud and the gunk of this world, but God quickly comes when we come back to him, and he gives us a robe of righteousness, bestows his honor on us. And then the verse goes on, and it says, bring the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. And so this is where we're going to pick up today, because last week we talked about how the ring represents authority. The ring represents the authority of God that he has bestowed upon his sons and daughters to go and do business on his behalf. Each and every one of us have authority. Everybody say authority. We have authority. God created us to live and represent his authority, not to work and gain our own power or influence, but to ultimately carry out his power and influence in our kingdom. This week we want to talk about the sandals. He put sandals on his feet. And so the first point of today's message is take your sandals off, take your shoes off, take your sandals off. The sandals, this is pretty interesting to study this in the Bible. The sandals represent freedom or rights. And as we look to the Old Testament and how sandals were used in the Old Testament, we see how the sandals represented rights or freedom. In the other point to make, the sandals, they were only afforded to the upper class. Sandals were one of the means that you would use to recognize the slaves from those who had wealth or had status, as you would be able to see that the influential, those who had money or power, they were wearing sandals. The slaves could not afford sandals. And so within the Old Testament, we see how taking off your sandals was it represented surrendering your rights. Boaz and Ruth, if you look in Ruth chapter 4, we see how Boaz was one of Ruth's kinsman redeemers. Now, there was another gentleman that was the first in line to be a kinsman redeemer to Ruth. Essentially, if someone in the family died, if a brother had a brother, if the brother died, the next brother in line was supposed to step in and redeem the widow and to care for her, to marry her and provide for that widow. If there were no brothers in that family line to care for the widow, then there would have been relatives that had to step in and be the kinsman redeemer to that widow and to care for the widow. And so Boaz was a kinsman redeemer to Ruth. If you know the story of Boaz and Ruth, and what happens is Boaz finds out that he is a kinsman redeemer to Ruth. He goes to the city gates and he asks the next in line to redeem Ruth, are you going to fulfill your duties as kinsman redeemer? I'm going to pick up in Ruth chapter 4, verse 7, just to illustrate how the sandals represent the rights, the surrendering of rights. That's what the sandals represent. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. And he removed his sandal. So the guardian redeemer takes off his sandal as a way to represent, I'm giving up my rights, I'm surrendering my rights to redeem Ruth's property and to cover her. This is now you. You can do this. He gives up his rights, surrenders them. We see Moses as he is walking through the desert. If you know this story, he's walking through the desert. He comes upon a burning bush. And the burning bush is talking to him now. And so if you've ever had kind of a weird day, that would have been a weird day. And in Exodus chapter 3, verse 5, God said from the burning bush, do not come any closer. Take off your sandals. For the place you're standing is holy ground. And so the first step to draw close to God was, I'm going to take off my sandals. I'm going to surrender my rights. And in surrendering my rights, I'm going to draw close to you. Joshua meets the commander of the Lord's armies in Joshua chapter 5, verse 15. And the commander of the Lord's army replied, which would have been Jesus, the commander of the Lord's army. I love this because there's a whole discourse that happens between Jesus and Joshua, and the commander's like, Joshua asks him, who are you here for, us or them? And the commander of the Lord's army says, neither. I'm here for my purposes, my will. And what he says after that is he tells Joshua, take off your sandals. Everybody say, take off your shoes. For the place where you're standing is holy. And so Joshua did. And so again, we see how it was through the surrendering of rights that Joshua entered closer to God, how Boaz stepped in and redeemed Ruth. Here's the big idea that I want you to see. If the sandals represent surrendering your rights, we need to realize in life we're going to be a servant to someone or something. Each and every one of us, you're going to serve someone or something. I just want you to take an honest assessment for a minute. Why do you go to work? Why do you do the things that you're doing? Why do you listen to your boss? Why do you care about what goes on in the home? Why do you care what people think on social media, what people say? We are going to serve someone or something, and the message that's being sent with the sandals today is that when we surrender our rights to Jesus, ultimately in surrendering our rights to Jesus, we experience ultimate freedom. It's through surrendering our rights and ultimately choosing to serve Him and putting Him first in our life that we experience all that God has for us. In John chapter 8, Jesus is talking to some Jews, and the Jews that He's talking to, they're trying to figure out, Jesus, who are you? What's your deal? Like, what is it that you're all about? In verse 31, it says, to the Jews who had believed Him, Jesus said, if you hold my teachings, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Everybody say free. One more time, free. They answered Him, we are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves to anyone. Here's the funny thing about this. If you know this, what's currently going on in the cultural times of Israel, the Jews were currently oppressed and enslaved by the Romans. But the Jews in this passage are saying, oh, we're not ruled by anyone. We're free. But the Romans were ruling over them at the time. They were blind to the way that they were actually being oppressed and enslaved by the cultural system around them. And it goes on. They answered Him, we are Abraham's descendants. We've never been slaves to anyone. How can you say we shall be set free? Jesus replied, very truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now, a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. The obvious point that we can make from this passage is, yes, you're going to serve someone or something, and it's easy to let sin be the thing that you serve. The sinful desires, the sinful cravings, sin becoming a master, telling you what to do, when to do it, how to do it, where to do it. And so I've had this horrible demon reintroduced to my life named sugar recently. And some of you know this demon. You were quite well acquainted to it. And so the other day, I come off being super healthy from like January up until Easter, discipline, no sugar, watching the carbs, all that stuff that you're supposed to do. And I reintroduced sugar on Easter, and you would have thought I was a meth addict going back for another hit. Like, oh my goodness, the neurons that fired in my brain, all of a sudden I'm like mowing down a bag of M&Ms, enjoying every second of it, just smashing M&Ms. I see cookies. I walked into church the other day. The homeschool group put 2 cookies on my desk. Bless that homeschool group. Whoever put those cookies on my desk, thank you. I'm just going to thank every service for those cookies. Please don't bring any more cookies in to church. I don't need more sugar in my life. But it is a demon. I had no self-control. That sugar was like, eat me now, and I devoured that sugar, and it tasted so good, and it was delicious. Now, jokingly, I talk about how I had very little self-control over that sugar, but there are things in our life that they're greater demons than that, where they control you. They control where you go. They control what you do. They control when you do it. They're your master. And this is how addictions happen. They have power and control over you, and they can just be crippling and paralyzing and overwhelming. And through this message, you're going to see ultimately how to break out of that addictive cycle. But sin can be your master. Politics can be your master, especially in the season that we're in the United States of America. The Jews, they were in the midst of a political system ruled by the Romans, and they were blind to the way that the political system was actually controlling them. Religion can be a master. And this, again, going back to this parable of Luke chapter 15, Jesus is talking to the religious leaders of the time. He's talking to a group of people that are instilling and upholding a religious system that is oppressing the people. And that's why Jesus is pointing out, you're not free and you can't see it in John chapter 8. In Luke chapter 15, verse 1, again, Jesus is talking. He's saying, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. You see, what we need to understand about the Pharisees is they were enslaved by doing all the right things, trying to do all the right things in order to get rights and freedom from God. The Pharisees, there were over like 600 different sub-laws that they came up with to the Old Testament. It was crippling. It was enslaving the expectations that the Jews had to live up to in order to feel like they were right with God. The Pharisees thought that they could do a bunch of right things in order to earn God's favor. In order to earn freedom, they thought they had to do a bunch of things to get that freedom. Now, here's what's interesting. The older brother comes in at the end of the story of the prodigal son, and the older brother, he represents the Pharisees. The older brother represents a slavery of works-based religion, of rights-based thinking, of I deserve this entitlement mentality. Luke chapter 15, verse 29 says, he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Here's the funny thing about that. He had just disobeyed his orders, his father's orders, by not coming into the party. He had just dishonored his father and basically said the same thing that the younger son said. I don't care about you, Dad. I'm going to do my own thing. And he goes on, you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. False. He would have probably given him a lot throughout his lifetime. How many of y'all parents know what I'm talking about? Like, kids, I have provided the roof over your head, every food you've ever eaten. All right, stop complaining. But when this son of yours who squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. You see, I hope you see this. The older brother thought that what he did earned him favor with God. The older brother thought that if he did all the right things for God, then God would be happy with him, God would bless him, that God would give him everything that he ever wanted. The older brother was doing in order to get from God. If you always feel like you have to do the right things in order to please God, listen to me now when I say this. You'll live your life, and everyone else in your life, they will feel the pressure of you expecting them to do all the right things in order to earn your favor. Your kids will experience that pressure. Your coworkers will experience that pressure. If you have the concept of God that you have to do all the right things to get close to Him, then you'll make people do all the right things to get close to you. And you'll never, here's the scary thing about this, and all the while, you will never feel like you measure up to God. You will never feel like God is pleased with you. Why? Because you haven't surrendered your rights. You haven't surrendered your perception of what you think is right. For some, the big takeaway today is that you've become a little bit too focused on doing, and in order to earn your rights with God, and you need to remember that you gave up your rights. For some, the big takeaway today is that you've gotten a little bit too focused on doing in order to get from God, that you forgot that you gave your rights up when you came to God. And it's a beautiful place to live. And so everybody say, take your sandals off. Take your sandals off. Each of us, we need to have a prodigal moment where we stop working as a hired servant to the world's systems, and we come back to our Father with no rights. We need to have moments where we just like the hired servant, just like the prodigal who recognized, I'll come back as a hired servant. I'm going to give up all my rights. I'll be a hired servant. And we come to God with that prodigal heart of, I have no rights, I have nothing, and God, I'm coming back to you. In Romans chapter 6, verse 18, it says, you have been set free from sin and become slaves to righteousness. Could you imagine the freedom that you would live with, the freedom you could experience if each and every day you got to wake up free from shame, free from guilt, free from insecurity, free from jealousy, gossip, envy, greed, fear of failure, insecurity, loneliness? Could you imagine the freedom that you would live with if you didn't have to live with the pressure of the sin that so easily entangles you and the pressures of culture that are coming on you, the political systems that are trying to manipulate you, the freedom that would come from that if you choose to live as a slave to righteousness? Because here's the beautiful thing that happens. You come to God, you give up all your rights, you become a slave to righteousness, a slave to Him. Ultimately, you go, God, I will be your hired servant. I'll be your servant. You come to Him, and what does He say? Romans chapter 5, verse 1. It is for freedom. Everybody say freedom. It's for freedom that Christ has set you free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened against by the yoke of slavery. And so, in marriage, this is I think the most beautiful example I can give you. In marriage, one of the things we say in our marriage ceremonies is that in marriage, you give up your rights. You enter into a covenant relationship. In a business contract, you enter into a business contract to protect your rights. In marriage, you lay down your rights for the benefit of the other person. You enter into a covenant. Now, before I was married, I experienced a lot of slavery. I was enslaved to bitterness. I was enslaved to even hatred towards women at one point in my life. I mean, my life was controlled with bitterness and resentment and just pain. But when I met Abby, something began healing in my heart. And through this expression of free love that was shown to me and the love that I showed back to Abby, I was set free from this pain and this bitterness. You see, it is the same concept in marriage, where in marriage you lay down your rights, but in the process of laying down your rights, you stop doing good to try to please the other person, and you start doing good because you love them. Because I love Abby, I do certain things. Because I love God, because I'm in love with God, I do certain things. I'm not doing certain things to try to happy wife, happy life. Got 2 laughs out of that. That's good. I love my wife out of freedom, out of a place of absolute gratitude and joy. You no longer have to do in order to earn, but out of freedom, you love, and therefore you do. It's in that place of surrendering rights to your life, of offering your life wholly to God, that you're filled with such gratitude and freedom that you, out of that love, you want to do certain things. Not because you have to, but because you get to. So second point, put on his sandals. The prodigal came with no freedom. He had lost all freedom in his life. He was a hired servant, and he came with no freedom. And yet he was freely given freedom. That's what the sandals represent. He was offered freedom. And so I was thinking about this point, and originally I had put on your sandals, but I changed it. And I rewrote, put on his sandals. Because the slave didn't even have sandals when it came to God. Or the slave didn't even have sandals when it came to his Father. And in the same way, we have nothing. We recognize we have nothing when we come to God. We come in a state of brokenness and dependence on Him, and we put on His sandals that He gave us. It's a free gift. It's not something we can earn. It is a gift. And I have been guilty. Abby, she will shop for me because I have no sense of fashion. And so she will buy all my clothes and buy my shoes, and she'll, honey, I got this for you. Thanks, honey. That's awesome. And I have to keep up with the students and all the trends so y'all can pray for me. Can't even dress the way I want to anymore. But she'll get me these new shoes, and she got me this really beautiful pair of boots one time. And I mean, nicest pair of boots that I'd ever got in my whole life, And I remember I just kept them in the box. I mean, for like weeks, they were just in the box. And Abby was like, do you not like the shoes I got you? I was like, no, honey, I love them. They're incredible shoes. Why aren't you wearing them? I don't want to mess them up. I don't want to mess my shoes up. This is just how I think, But I'm so thankful that we serve a God that has many pairs of shoes. And we can keep messing those shoes up day after day, week after week, and keep coming back to him as a servant, keep coming back to him and saying, Father, I messed up again. I need your help. I didn't use my freedom correctly. I made some mistakes. I've sinned. I've messed up. And he'll say, all right, son. All right, daughter. I forgive you. Let me get you some new shoes. It's the kindness of God that's going to lead us towards repentance. It's that kind of grace that changes our hearts, that transforms us. It's not through like the Pharisees of trying hard to be better, to do right. All that does is create this perpetual cycle of guilt and shame in our lives that pushes us farther away from God. It's because you have his sandals that you now have freedom from guilt. You don't have to live with guilt and shame anymore. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16 says, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. You see, slaves, they had to be summoned by the king. The only time slaves got to see the master or the king was if they were summoned. And a lot of times, how many of y'all know what we're talking about? Like the boss calls you into the office, you're like, am I in trouble? You have to talk to mom and dad, am I in trouble? But a son or a daughter can come into the presence of their heavenly Father at any point, jump into his lap. My kids know they can jump into my lap whenever they want to. They can come running up to me. They ask for the craziest things. It's the most beautiful things. They know they can come into my presence, and they can come into my presence over and over again. And you can be free from guilt and shame because you have access to him. You can approach his throne of grace with confidence to receive help. Listen, he knows you can't do it on your own. He knows you can't be right on your own. We can't afford our own righteousness. That's why he gave us a robe of righteousness. We can't create our own authority. That's why he wants to give us authority. We can't provide our own peace, our own freedom. That's why he wants to give us this freedom to walk in, this freedom of relationship with him, this freedom to approach him time and time again to receive help and to receive mercy. And it'll change your life. Keep coming back to him. Listen, I don't care if it's been 2 days since you fell into the addiction or the pattern or whatever you keep on stumbling into. Get back up. Receive his grace. Receive his forgiveness. Go 3 days. And you go 3 days and you go back to his throne of grace and you get back up after you fall 3 days in a row and you get up and you go 4 days. And I'm so fired up because one of the guys that got baptized last week, he's been 33 days free of marijuana use. And this morning I was talking to him. He's like, I'm up to 40. And I'm like, amen. And 33 years from now, it's going to be 33 years and 40 days. Why? Because he's going to get back up and keep experiencing God's grace, keep experiencing God's power and his freedom to live a new life. It's that kind of surrendering of your own rights, surrendering of your own will to God, and you keep coming back to him. You keep receiving his power. You keep receiving his grace. And one day, years from now, you look back and you're not the same person because you recognize everything that you have comes from your Father. And it changes you. That kind of loving relationship changes your life because you recognize you haven't earned a thing and he's done it all in and through you, and it's all because of his grace. And so you can have freedom from guilt. You can have freedom from fear. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 14 says, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Regardless of what's going on in your life, The beautiful news of these sandals is that though the slaves would have walked through rough terrain and had to experience the rocks and the thorns and the pokes and the prods, you can walk through rough terrain. You can go through struggles in life and still experience God's peace. Why? Why can I experience God's peace when everything else around me is crumbling or failing or not going the right way? Why? Because I know that at the end of all things, Jesus has accomplished for me an eternal victory that far outweighs all of the momentary struggles that I might go through. And so what the world might see as a failure, God sees as a victory. Why? Because I'm being transformed more and more into His image as I trust Him through the hard times, through the trials, as I walk through the feet fitted with the gospel of peace. That's the peace I can walk in. I can walk in His peace. You have freedom. You have freedom to walk in peace. You have freedom to live without fear because He has already won. He has already overcome everything, every trial. You don't have to be afraid of death. You don't have to be afraid of failure. You don't have to be afraid of rejection. Why? Because Jesus is always with us. Finally, you have freedom from sin and death. In Luke chapter 15, verse 32, it says, "We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now he's found." Listen to me. When you realize the pig slop that you've been living in, and for some of you, it's been the pig slop of religious duty. It's been the pig slop of trying to do all the right things to please God, and it's been exhausting. For others, it's been the pig slop of addictions and gambling and gossip and pride. But I remember quite vividly the pig slop I was living in. I remember the life I was living before I came to Christ. I remember the brokenness. I remember the pain. I remember how addicted I was, and I never want to forget it. I never want to forget what that pig slop tasted like. Because every day, it draws my heart back towards God. It fills my heart with such gratitude. It fills my heart with great love that makes me and brings me to a place where I do things not because I'm trying to get something from God, but because I love Him and He saved my life. Take off your shoes and then put your shoes back on. Take off the pressures, the expectations, that works-based thinking that says you've got to do in order to get closer to God, and put on the shoes of His grace, His unconditional love towards you. Can I pray for you? God, I thank You for each and every person here. I thank You that You have called them sons and daughters, that You want to bestow upon them Your righteousness, Your identity. And You're waiting for us, just like the prodigal, to have a moment where we surrendered our rights, that we gave up our lives so that we could experience the life You have for us.
Hey, thank you for watching Victory Life Church on YouTube. I want you to subscribe so that you know when we go live or when we post new content. And also, leave me a comment and let me know how today's message spoke to you, or where you're watching from, or even how we can be praying for you. And if you would like to financially support the ministry, just click the link below. God bless you, and thank you for joining us today.